questions, let us have a look around first and see how much we owe to science in what our modern life looks like and what humans are able to achieve. Conquering space, deep ocean, discovered the atom, extending our lifespan nearly 2 times, and connecting humans to each other in an unprecedented manner, all through science in its modern definition. In fact, we almost owe every significant development in our life to science. While questions of fundamental nature, like the above, are often difficult to outline, and although this documentary seeks to adopt a rather broad understanding of what science is about, the intellectual and practical activity encompassing the systematic study of the structure and behavior of the physical and natural world through observation and experiment. In order to examine to what extent our ancestral human population have been practicing what might meet such a definition, answering this partially through a journey in time, beginning with the unique human cognitive endowments and the surrounding conditions that permitted them, in terms of observing and experimenting, communicating experience through education, and so on.
It is so important actually to understand the brain, how does the brain work, to understand the origin of the human. That is to say, if we want to address the evolution of the human being, the rise of the modern human species, we have to express how does the brain of this modern human being work. There are different levels to study the brain, different levels of neuroscience. We know that you can start either from a molecular level, cellular level, system levels, or cognitive and behavioral level. We are mostly interested on the cognitive and behavioral aspect of the neuroscience. Why we are obsessed with the human being? Because simply we know that the brain of the human does look like the different brains of other mammals. But the problem, we know that actually also from several observations that the baby human when he is born, it looks similar to the babies of other mammals. Maybe even the other species have a better function, better way of perceiving the world than the baby human. But the challenge and the mystery of that, the human child pick up and learn from the different environment in a conceptual way that exceed any other mammal in the world. So how is that really possible? We know that there are certain areas on the frontal lobe of the brain that are considered with the decision making and with approaching and interacting with the environment. If you want to pick up something, certain neurons will start firing that you can detect them easily. But what is really interesting, if you, for example, grab something, signals will be transmitted to the brain, express that you are now locating your hand on this object. But actually what is really interesting and has been discovered by chance in Italy, that certain subtypes or subsets of those neurons even fire if someone else did the same action. It means that this is a way one can consider to look at how the people can interact with each other. Why certain people would cheer up for certain team, for example, in football or soccer game. How would they perceive the beautiful melody and specific part of it when they interact with the environment? How do we reach each other? How do we interact with each other? Why do we like to be with certain people and not with the other? So all of those questions can be introduced and can be answered by introducing the concept of this new concept, which neuroscientists call them the mirror neurons. Mirror neurons has been preserved in certain areas of the brain and has been not only discovered on the human being but also in other species.
A reflective mind with functional mirror neurons, paving the way for the cataclysmic events of the Paleolithic revolution that took place in this part of our world, the Sahara, Sai Island, and its surroundings. Rock art in the Sahara and Red Sea. rock drawings as a ritual portraying a species in quest for absolute control over nature and reflecting such inner psyche. There is no evidence of other species practicing art. It is thus a strictly unique human trait, together with another symbolic tool, language. Language is part of a common system of signs and symbols, beliefs and practices that is shared across human cultures. What is known as the occult is argued for by Carl Jung as a shared human mental experience forming what he calls the collective unconscious. The utilization of symbols and signs are part of the evolution of the human species, whether hand gestures, languages, drawings, or lately writing system. It is an integral part of the complex cognition system of a species capable of abstraction, imagination, and intuition, some of the traits that define us as humans and that remain largely a mystery hitherto. Drawing and painting, some of the most unique behavioral characteristics of the human species, are classified outside the domain of science. Although the act itself is symbolic of sophisticated abstraction and refined creativity, the culture of extraction, mixing, and preparation of color is among the earliest chemical techniques ever used. Humans carried all this upon their migration out of Africa as part of the universal cargo that accompanied the human migrations. Although the current learning systems embedded in the college-university model are only a few hundred years old, similar to modern science, education and knowledge systems are much older, dating to the nativity of our species and subsequent to the division of labor that followed the Neolithic Revolution. That is to say, the two most revolutionary changes in the history of our species, the advent of agriculture and animal domestication.
أثبتت الدراسات الجينية والدراسات الأخرى أن الرعي بدأ في هذه المنطقة، استئناس المبكر للحيوان بدأ في هذه المنطقة. ما وجد من آثار حيوانات وما وجد من آثار DNA لهذه الحيوانات أثبت أنه هذه المنطقة شهدت التدجين الأول لكثير جدا من الحيوانات، على رأسها الكلب والفيل والحمار وكذلك البقر يعني. والبقر طبعا كان هو الوسيلة الكبرى للرعي في هذه المنطقة بل في العالم بصورة عامة يعني. من ناحية الزراعة أيضا يعني أثبتت الآثار أن هذه المنطقة وبالذات في المنطقة بتاعت الواقع على الحدود السودانية المصرية الحالية، المنطقة بتاعت نبتة بلايا والمناطق الجنوب منها إلى منطقة وادي هور، يعني هذه المنطقة وجدت فيها أقدم أنواع الحبوب البرية، يعني سابقة بكثير جدا من الحبوب البرية أو الحبوب الزراعية التي وجدت في منطقة الشرق الأوسط. والباحثين الآن يعني بدأوا يراجعوا المفاهيم القديمة باعتبار أن الأساليب الزراعية الأولى والتجارب الزراعية الأولى بدأت في المنطقة الصحراوية الحالية وبالذات المنطقة الواقعة ما بين وادي هور والواحة الخالية في مصر.
Agriculture, engineering, architecture, animal production, pharmacy, chemistry, astronomy, physics, mathematics, and biology were all known disciplines and branches of science today.
If one can say that Society 1 was really based on the way that our early ancestors were using instruments, very simple instruments for hunting. This is called Society 1. It's all based on hunting, killing animals and feeding themselves. Society 2 was the discovery of agriculture, was based on agriculture. Society 3 was based on the industry, the Industrial Revolution, that we saw in Europe, starting in Europe. And Society 4 is the Information and Communication Society, and the society that we are aiming for, which is Society 5, is the society, as I just described, of digitization of the artificial intelligence.
With the emergence of larger human communities and accumulation of wealth, part of the society dissociation from the direct production process, forming the state and specializing in knowledge and spirituality, some of the necessary aspects to maintain these communities.
شغلت المستوطنات البشرية أغلب المناطق السودانية القديمة. هذه المستوطنات شكلت النواة الأولى للحضارة وللثقافة عموما. تشكلت المستوطنات البشرية في مناطق عديدة من السودان، سواء كان في منطقة البطانة أو منطقة الدرمان الحالية أو منطقة الخرطوم أو منطقة وادي حلفة أو منطقة شندي. هذه المستوطنات شكلت الظهور الأول للإنسان الحضاري، ظهور الطبقية، ظهور التراتيبية، وهو نوع متقدم واختزاق، حيث يظهر الحاكم والمحكوم في الطبقة في العشيرة نفسها. شكلت هذه المستوطنات أول مملكة سودانية أو أول مملكة أفريقية عموما في وادي النيل، هي مملكة سيتي السودانية التي كانت عاصمتها بالقسطل في شمال السودان. هذه المملكة كانت أول مملكة في وادي النيل ظهرت فيها الرموز الملكية الأولى مثل الرمز حورس، وكذلك تاج الجنوب أو تاج تاسيتي أو التاج الأبيض الذي قام بارتدائه الملك نعرمر مؤسس الأسرة الأولى المصرية أو ما يعرف بالحضارة الفرعونية.
The kinship of knowledge or science to spirituality or religion and magic is seen in the oldest universities that largely remained religious centers, Azhar, Zaytuna, Oxford, and so on, up to the 20th century, and some even to this very day. Witch doctors are another living testimony to the common origin of knowledge and cognitive domains. They heal spiritually and physically and make predictions about life and the cosmos that subscribe to and satisfy human curiosity.
Science as we know it today, in this modern definition, is no longer than perhaps 300 years ago. Still science struggles to define itself, to understand its territory compared to other sources of knowledge. Modern philosophy does not differentiate between science and other modes of knowledge.
Traditional healers had magical powers in using herbs to treat ailments, paving the way to chemistry, alchemy, and pharmacy.
ذكرت في البرديات أسماء أطباء في القرن السابع والعشرين قبل الميلاد، مثال حسيرع اللي هو يعتبر رئيس الأطباء وأطباء الأسنان في تلك الحقبة الزمنية، ويعتبر من أوائل الأطباء في تلك الحقبة، وكان في تقدير كبير للأطباء في منطقة وادي النيل. فمثلا إمحوتب كان يعتبر إله الطب عند الأغاريق، ومهنة الطب لم تكن حكرا على الرجال فقط، فوجدت أسماء لطبيبات وحملوا حتى مناصب إدارية في المؤسسة الصحية. كان تعليم الطب يتم بصورة رأسية من الآباء للأبناء مباشرة، لكن المعابد قامت بتبني الفكرة دي وأنشأت مدارس صحية، ومن أشهر المدارس دي مدرسة الطب في الإسكندرية أو جامعة الإسكندرية التي تأسست عام 300 قبل الميلاد واستمرت حوالي 6 قرون، وخرجت أطباء مشهورين جدا، مثال جالينوس اللي هو يعتبر من مؤسسين الجراحة، كانت كتاباته مستخدمة حتى القرن السادس عشر ميلادي. وبرضه هيروفيلوس اللي هو يعتبر من المؤسسين لعلم التشريح. كانت شهرة الأطباء في المنطقة دي عالية جدا، فكان بيطلب مرات إنه يتم انتداب أطباء من هذه المنطقة لمناطق ثانية بواسطة ملوك. ومن الحاجات المهمة برضو النظام الصحي اللي هو أشبه ما يكون بنظام التأمين الصحي، فالمواطنين ما كانوا بيدفعوا أي مقابل للأطباء، أما الأطباء فكانوا بيستقبلوا الراتب حقهم مباشرة من الملوك أو الفراعنة. ومن الحاجات الثانية المهمة اللي هي التخصصات، فهيرودوت لما جزر مصر في الفترة ديك وصف الأطباء فقال إنه أي طبيب بيشتغل على منطقة معينة، مثلا في أطباء للعيون، في أطباء لأمراض البطن، أطباء للأنف، ودي بتشبه حاليا التخصصات الحالية، النساء والتوليد والأطفال والجراحة. فكان في فصل بيتم بين الأطباء والجراحين زي ما حاليا حاصل. ومن أهم البرديات اللي هي اتوجدت في بردية سميث، دي فيها قرابة 48 حالة جراحية، طريقة التشخيص والعلاج، وبرديات أخرى فيها الأمراض مختلفة ما مختصة بس بالجراحة. في معبد كومامبو في جدارية وجدت فيها الأدوات الجراحية اللي كانت مستخدمة في الفترة دي.
Agriculture and animal breeding gave way to textile and wool fabrics, as well as other technologies becoming a byproduct of agriculture. Although natural dyes were the aesthetic value, initially they evolved with textiles to become a predecessor of chemistry as well. Astronomy is not only about the view of our place in the universe, but has conjunction with trade and human movements.
The pastoralists has always been great astronomers. Why? Because they follow the stars. That's why even their goddesses are related to stars. Agricultural society have relationship, of course, to seasonality, but not to astronomy in the detailed sense. They don't need to know the position of the stars. They need the seasons because this is related to their crops. But then, when the state was formed, in historical terms, when the state was formed through the conquest of the pastoralists and the ruling of those conquerors of farmers in this complementary and also troubled relationship, two astronomical cultures met, and this meeting happened here in the Nile, in Sudan and Egypt. This is very important, because the knowledge and the tools used by the pastoralist culture and the knowledge and the tools used by the settlers in the farming society combined to form modern science as we know it.
Modern humans emerged in East Africa, and there are multiple lines of evidence to suggest that. Most importantly, the genetic lines of evidence. Genetic data, whether based on mitochondrial DNA, Y chromosome, or autosomes, agrees on one thing. Humans began from a small number of ancestors in Africa, most likely East Africa. Why East Africa? The Sahara, neighboring Lake Chad, and the Red Sea, being part of the Rift Valley, both are scenes where excavations unraveled abundance of fossils of human ancestors. We explain evidence and arguments of why modern humans evolved in the plains, associating whenever possible these disparate sets of clues, including geological, climatological, and genetic, and reviewing the current literature that asserts the role of human diet in that transformation.
So Africa, being the Cushitic civilization center, also goes much further in terms of domestication processes. So you have got many species of crops that have been domesticated in this part of the world, and because you have got many population groups that specify their crops. For example, in Ethiopia, you have got teff that is related to the Ago society. You have got Insect ventricosum, false banana, that is associated to the Sidamas. And in fact, even those crops that are assumed to have been domesticated in Near East, like barley, are contested to have gone through parallel domestication in the Ethiopian setting. So you have coffee that have been domesticated in this part of the world. So because of emergence of man, hunter-gatherers effects, gathering crops, processes taking place also in terms of domestication, and in terms of the various population groups also that exist in this part of the world. You have got tremendous number of diversified crops and species. You have got a large number of crops that have been domesticated by different population groups. So if you date this, for example, if you date barley and see also the level of genetic diversity that exists in this part of Eastern Africa, it is much higher than what exists elsewhere. So level of genetic diversity is an accumulated event where variation could be stored and dating can be made.
The biological history of all species are known to be dependent on the climatic conditions of Earth and the surrounding environment, often leading to extinction or drastic adaptation, resulting in the success and flourishing of the species. The global geographic position of Africa and North Africa made it a natural refuge during extreme Earth climatic conditions. The current Sahara witnessed what is known as climate pulses. In corroboration of that, molecular genetic data is beginning to unravel interesting information on the extended human presence in this part of the globe prior to human expansion to various continents, and hence the likelihood of appearance of most human adaptive traits, including cognitive traits, at an early stage of human cultural revolution.
لما نتكلم عن السكان في السودان وعن الحراك السكاني في السودان، دائما يعني بتكون الإشارات خاصة في المجال الآثار بتاعنا، الإشارات دائما تكون لاتجاه شمال جنوب أو جنوب شمال، يعني الحركة بتاعت السكان وحركة الثقافة نفسها. لكن حقيقة الأدلة الموجودة اليوم ومن فترات طويلة بتوري إنه حتى المجاري تحت المياه اللي هي الوديان هي كانت واحدة من الطرق الرئيسية مش للمياه فقط، وإنما هي واحدة من الطرق الرئيسية لحركة السكان لانتقال الثقافة من مكان إلى آخر. كثير من الأودية الموجودة عندنا بتأدي دورها المهم جدا اللي هو في توفير المياه، بتأدي دورها في توفير حتى الأراضي الصالحة للزراعة بعد ما تنتهي جريان المياه، الفترة بتاعت جريان المياه، لأنه بيكون في منطقة رطبة وبيتم فيها الزراعة مش مرة واحدة، يمكن مرة ومرتين وثلاثة، يعني يزرع ويحصد ويزرع ويحصد ويزرع ويحصد 3 مرات لحد ما يعني تنشف فعلا المياه. وفي نفس الوقت أصبحت هي طريق للقوافل، طريق للتجارة. يعني كثير من الأدلة اللي اتلقت بتاعت أول حاجة السير بتاع الحيوانات المختلفة زي البعير مثلا، الأدلة بتاعت المعسكرات بتاعت الناس الماشيين نفسهم، وغير كده طبعا العمل الآثاري أثبت وجود فعلا يعني مواقع أثرية موجودة. على سبيل المثال يعني واحدة من حاجة الأودية المهمة جدا اللي هو وادي هور. يعني وادي هور ده لحد السبعينات كانت الفكرة إنه هو بينتهي في جبل راهب، يعني بيجي من تشاد، من المرتفعات بتاع تشاد يوصل لحد جبل راهب وبينتهي هنا في الحتة دي. وحقيقة الأقمار الصناعية والصور اللي ظهرت وضحت إنه لا أبدا، إنه جات رمال وغطت على جزء منه، وإنه بيمتد بيصل لحد النيل. لحد النيل وين بينزل؟ بينزل في المجرى الرئيسي، بينزل في الدبة، لكن عنده فروع أخرى صغيرة بتمتد وبتنزل يمكن لحد المناطق بتاعت الخندق إلى الشمال، يعني واضحة جدا من الصور الجوية. والإيفيدنس اللي لقيناها حتى من الأورال هيستوري، من التاريخ الشفاهي من الناس، إنه في حركة بتاعت التجارة بتجي وبتنضم، يعني المجموعات اللي بتجي من النيل بتمشي بتنضم للمجموعات اللي موجودة في درب ال40 عبر وادي هور. يعني بيمشوا عبر وادي هور لحد ما يلاقوا المجموعة الجاية من أقصى غرب السودان، من كوبي وغيرها من المواقع، وبتلاقوا معاهم وبيمشوا يواصلوا الرحلة إلى الشمال. الأدلة الأثرية أكدت بعد ذاك فعلا إنه في حضارات قديمة، في ثقافات قديمة، عصور حجرية موجودة في المجرى ده، وكان طبعا اسمه النهر الأصفر، يعني لأنه هو نهر بشق الصحراء. الميزة في الأنهار دي طبعا أو في الأودية دي إنه إذا حفرت مسافة بسيطة تلقى المياه، عشان كده بالنسبة للتجارة، بالنسبة للناس الماشيين، هي مكان آمن بيلقوا فيه المياه. الحاجة المهمة جدا هو إنه بينتقلوا ناس. هل الانتقال بتاع الناس وبتاع التجار ده بينتهي بس بعملية التجارة ولا بيكون في استقرار؟ دي هي النقطة المهمة، هو إنه ده كان معبر حقيقي مهم جدا وخلى يكون في اختلاط، وأصبح الأدلة الأثرية ذاتها وضحت إنه في حركات في أوقات مختلفة، يعني في حركات من النيل وإلى الغرب، وفي حركات من الغرب وإلى النيل، وفي فترات يعني مختلفة من تاريخ السودان.
In chronological sense, the cascade of events that led to what we know today as science started with early technological shifts in the Paleolithic associated with what is seen as an appearance of humanization in culture, tools, etc. A reflection of profound underlying biological changes in the human brain leading to the current human endowment. Bows, arrows, and boomerangs were already known in hunter-gatherer societies as revolutionary technologies involving the physics of trajectories, requiring an entirely novel brain endowment. We already know that humans were familiar with such tools prior to their exodus from the continent, as suggested by common hunting and sacrifice practices between Eastern Africa, Polynesia, and Australia. Furthermore, evidence exists that humans used boats, canoes, or rafts to cross to Australia and Oceania. Science and technology were always meant to respond to human needs and problem solving. Fire, which preceded the emergence of modern man, is an example. Tools are another example of the lithic objects that predates our species as well, is a simple form of tools of survival when compared to bows, arrows, and boomerangs, which involve mastering sophisticated concepts and a brain adapted to calculating complex trajectories and piloting rafts to cross from Asia to Australia and Oceania. We then move from the Sahara, east and south, to entertain evidence of subsequent human revolutions. In the fishing communities around Khartoum, some of the earliest human sedentary cultures predating similar cultures in agriculture and pastoral communities, as witnessed in the pottery revolution. Pottery, although believed to predate the Neolithic revolution, is another landmark. Without pottery, human settlement would have been quite different. It is not only a technological advancement, it held profound meanings to the human psyche. It is perhaps, with the bow and arrow, the first manufactured tools that are not a modification of raw natural material. In other words, it is an invention. It isn't surprising that clay was used to denote the tale of Genesis. Where did we find the earliest artifacts of this development that claims no ownership or intellectual property? It is believed to have begun with what is known as the Khartoum Shehnab culture. Pottery not only revolutionized the household, creating man-made utensils, it was subsequently pivotal for another groundbreaking development, fermentation. Bread and wine have a similar process in pastoralism, sour milk, and yogurt, which extends the life of the dairy products. Other food processing procedures, such as salting and drying, followed suit, creating the foreground for trade between agriculture and pastoralist societies.
Today I'm going to discuss one example of one of the most successful treatments, and that was based on the consumption of alcoholic beverage. And this alcoholic beverage based on the fermentation, which proved to have very potent therapeutic antibiotic action from ancient Sudan. Traces of tetracyclines have been found, detected in human skeletons excavated in Nubia 2,000 years ago. That is centuries before the discovery of tetracycline, which was first time being produced pharmaceutically back in 1948.
Clay processing was also necessary for metallurgy, as it was the embryonic form of the Industrial Revolution in the manufacturing of metal. It is only a few hundred years ago that metal furnaces replaced the mud ones.
Merowe has been known as a great African iron production centre for over 100 years, and probably longer, when people recognise the remains of these great mounds of what we now know to be iron slag. So these rocks that we see, these very black rocks that litter the surface of the royal city of Merowe, are in fact iron slag, which is the waste product of iron smelting. And we know from our research that at Merowe, on the surface, there are over 35 heaps of various sizes of this iron slag. And we also know that underground there are mountains of iron slag. And what you can see in front of us is Merowe's largest slag heap. It actually would have been even bigger before the British built their railway through it. And a few years ago, we started to investigate this slag mound, and we revealed that it is over 5 meters deep of metallurgical waste. And from our radiocarbon dates, we know that this perhaps represents 500 years of iron production. And in fact, this slag mound is not the only slag mound that was being created during these early times. And some of our largest remains of iron production were actually being created in the Napperton period. So even before the kings and queens of Merowe moved here, iron production was being produced in huge quantities at the royal city.
In Kerma, one of the earliest agro-pastoralist communities, stands the oldest known surviving mud brick edifice in defiance of time and symbolizing a community with marked social organization and refined culture, portrayed in some of the finest pottery of all time. Both architecture and pottery are neither science nor art, but are a complex produce of human ingenuity serving functional and spiritual needs. Architecture is related to the rise of the city-states and, in many ways, the elevation of the human ego above nature.
مثال الخندق دي، الخندق لأنها ميناء، وأي ميناء في العالم طبعاً بيجمع التجار من مختلف أنحاء العالم. ونفس الشيء بنتكلم عن الخندق، كانت فعلا هي مدينة كبيرة، ميناء كبير رسمي، أهملوا التاريخ حقيقة لفترة طويلة جدا، يعني أهملت حتى في مجال الآثار، كانت مهملة، ما في إشارة لها كموقع أثري مهم جدا، كعمارة طينية متميزة، مباني طاب جيم ما موجودة، ما عندنا نموذج زي ده إلا زي ما ذكرت لك في بعض الحصون والقلاع أو ما يسمى بالدفي اللي هي موجودة في منطقة الشلال الثالث وإلى الشمال، مناطق المحس، مناطق السكوت وغيرها، واللي هي مباني بتاعة تحصين يعني في النهاية عسكري يعني، لكن مباني بتاعة سكن بالمستوى ده يعني نادر جدا في السودان، ومبنيه من زي ما ذكرت من الطوب الاخضر، وكعماره نادره جدا يعني بنعتبرها في المنطقه دي.
We then return to the Sahara and what is known as the Neolithic Revolution. During the Holocene or the Advent and spread of animal domestication and agriculture, perhaps the two greatest human revolutions of all times. We are still under the spell and influence of these most fundamental changes in the history of humans. Humans remain to be defined culturally and even biologically by these past events. Hunter-gatherers, the earliest and the oldest of those tamers, were zoologists and botanists, masters in animal behavior and classification of plants. These skills eventuated in what is known as the Neolithic Revolution, where humans managed to modify the behavioral and reproductive conditions of other species to the realms of their economy. This revolution not only modified our surrounding environment, but contributed to the change of our genome, as evident in a very important human trait, the digestion of milk. Humans, like other mammals, cease to digest milk after weaning. However, some populations are capable of metabolizing milk beyond childhood. These populations happen to be the same populations that adopted a dairy culture. This happened through a series of biological adaptations caused by culture, in the shape of mutation in the lactase gene, the gene responsible for the digestion of milk, resulting in persistence of the production of that enzyme. The origins of domestication could be a tricky question, as there are several criteria to be taken into consideration. One is the archaeological and historical evidence. History, however, was written only recently and perhaps authentically covers only the past 4 millennia. Archaeology is key, but has the shortcoming that excavations cover a limited area relative to the width and breadth of human expansion. Where and when is the hypothetical arena that witnessed these events? There are other lines of evidence and clues based on the type of relationships between the domesticate and the population practicing the domestication. For instance, the culture of domestication is more sophisticated, complex, and varied within populations that practiced it for a long time, expressed in behavioral and cultural traits as mentioned earlier. Recently, however, a new formidable type of evidence entered the scene with the adoption of DNA techniques that could associate the point of origin with the abundance of genetic varieties that exists in a particular area. This caused a shift in attitude from a sole origin of domestication in the Near East and India, where Bus indicus is predominant, to multiple origins that includes Africa, where both Bus taurus and indicus are prevalent, to single origins in Africa, with other evidence now piling up for other domesticated species including the donkey, camel, elephant, and sheep, vindicating Fred Wendorf, who has once shown cattle burial nearly 2,000 years prior to the accepted dates for the beginning of cattle domestication in Nabta Playa. Reinventing the wheel. We always hear the idiom, "You don't want to reinvent the wheel." And the wheel is indeed a major technological breakthrough. How, when, and where did that take place? The inventor or inventors of the wheel, like many groundbreaking inventions, will always remain anonymous. The wheel, like the horse and chariot, has been claimed to have originated in Asia, and it has been claimed that Egypt knew the chariot and horse, two formidable weapons, only through the Hyksos, an enigmatic group that historians automatically relegated to Asia in textbooks. Nile Valley Ptah theology is yielding evidence that the wheel was well known since the beginning of the dynastic era, when it depicting Ptah creating the humankind in a pottery wheel. Interestingly, Herodotus states a different fact about the chariot. He mentions that Libyans are the oldest to use chariots. Rock drawing discovered recently in the Sahara lends support to that claim. While mathematics can be seen earlier, attested by the oldest documented proof of a mathematical process in the heart of Africa, in Ishango-born Congo, it is likely that astronomy and cosmological related knowledge has witnessed an impetus through the spread of agriculture and animal domestication. Both practices depend on the stellar movement and calibration of life activities using the sun and moon. For nomadic pastoralists, the position of the stars is instrumental for their successful navigation of the wilderness. Those were elevated later on to gods and goddesses status, and the obsession with the stellar position in Nabta Playa, where together with burials are the oldest human observations of the sky, a rock constellation capable of calculating stellar recession, similar to Stonehenge only few thousand years earlier. Mathematical knowledge culminated in the calculation of the circumference of the Earth and the observatories in the royal city of Massawarat. Now mathematics have witnessed a leap jump with the merger of agricultural and pastoral societies in the very first city-states in Gustul and Karma, and the zenith of that culture in Egypt Delta. A continuation of these Saharan traditions is seen in Nabata. As Timothy Kendall of MFA observed, the astronomical calculation of Taharka's tomb, the sun rises over Taharka's pyramid, symbolizing his rebirth as Osiris on July 31st, the modern equivalent of the ancient New Year's Day, which was timed with the heliacal rising of Sirius when viewed from Karnak. 2,500 years ago, that day was the 7th of August. The sunset on the 16th of November from the top of Taharka's tomb, the same event would have been the 23rd of November, symbolizing the death of Osiris and the end of the flood season. Science is seen in writing systems, astronomy, trade, and metallurgy, as well as the continuity of these traditions all the way down to the Funj Sultanate, where, among other things, vaccination was practiced long before Edward Jenner claimed the invention, as mentioned in Spalding's book, The Heroic Age of Sinnar. Considering what is being said, why is there such prejudice and denial? Why is Africa denied any significant contribution to human cultures, as in the Wikipedia map, while facts suggest otherwise? And why some reactionary circles are apt to deprive the African continent from such earned privilege of human legacy? And why do we believe otherwise?
So, without any doubt, and at the same time, authorities like Elizabeth Schimann and Babilo, including Harlan, that have attested various crop domestication in Africa, and the center of domestication in the livestock and in the domestic food has taken place by and large. That doesn't mean that domestication didn't take place in other parts of the globe. For example, maize was domesticated in the North America, probably in the Central America, but we have got a large number of crops that have been domesticated in this. It isn't only the size. If you date and equate the dating to all the globes, then Africa becomes extremely very ancient in terms of the domestication process. That's the reason why you have got different food habits and diversification of processes. So Africa cannot be skipped or cannot be simply erased, particularly with the ancient civilization, Cushitic civilization that existed in this part of the world.
These circles, instead of admitting the timing and location ambiguity of the emergence of these events, are usually vehement, intending to associate both events with Mesopotamia and Asia Minor, almost in an occult manner. Such creed is known to be rooted in modern Aryan models rather than on solid scientific grounds, as indicated by Bernal and Diop. These attitudes might also be recent, accompanying the colonial and demographic expansion of population from the continent next door, Europe. This creed thrives on the 19th century frenzy of archaeological excavations, centered on candidate sites of interest to the collective European mind at that time. These archaic models are unable to stand scrutiny and fail to relate the available shreds of evidence on rise of human cultures to their respective plausible loci.
We all know now that humans originated in Africa around 60 to 100,000 years ago, and that the history of mankind is pretty much entangled to the history of Africa, and particularly to the history of East Africa.
The history of the ancient Sudan has been unknown to the great public, but also to science since many, many generations. Nowadays, we know for sure that the cultural evolution started in the Sudan at least in the 10th millennium BC, and comparable developments in the Egyptian Nile Valley had to wait for 5,000 years. This means the roots of pharaonic civilization, and therefore the roots of Greek and Roman and finally European civilization in general, lie in the north of the Sudan. When Egypt woke up, so to say, at around 4,500 BC, the Sudan had already a long cultural tradition. I think this is an important message, not only for scholars, not only for science, but this is an important message for the Sudan in general. This could give and should give the country the self-consciousness to be the cradle of human civilization, not only in Northeast Africa, but in the ancient world in general.